Welcome in, friends. My name is Chris. We are in my garage. Welcome back to Garage Thoughts. Before we get back in to Magyar and the Hungarian elections last week and what, going forward, he may face, I just wanted to thank everybody for the support on the last couple videos. It means a lot. If there's anything in particular you would like me to cover, please let me know. I'm more than willing to get into topics that are outside my wheelhouse. But like I said, I just wanted to start this off by appreciating all the support recently. It genuinely means the world to me. But let's get into what is next for Hungary and their new Prime Minister-elect, Magyar. And hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. I do want to give a shout out to our Hungarian friend in the comments on the last videos for helping to correct my pronunciation. I will promise that there will be other names I will mispronounce. You have to keep in mind that I am an American and I come from a country where 50% of our last names are either Smith or Johnson. And the only reason I'm somewhat competent at pronouncing things is because I played FIFA a lot as a kid. So I do want to put that disclaimer out there. But first off, Magyar has not waited. He has not taken a victory lap and he hasn't spent a week and a half celebrating before getting to work. Within hours of the results, standing in front of thousands of supporters, he delivered what I can describe as a declaration of institutional war. He called for the immediate removal of what he described as the puppets and pillars of Orbán's regime, such as the prosecutor general, the presidents of the Supreme and Constitutional Court, the director of the Hungarian Media Authority, basically every major Orbán appointed official embedded across every major institution of the Hungarian state. Magyar said that they should leave of their own volition rather than wait for us to fire them because we will fire them. By last Tuesday, Magyar walked directly into the Sandor Palace, the Hungarian presidential residence, for a face-to-face meeting with President Tamás Szujak, and hopefully I pronounced that right as well. Szujak was appointed by Orbán's Fidesz party in 2024 and is widely seen as one of the key remaining pillars of the old regime. Magyar's assessment of him, delivered publicly before and after the meeting, was anything but diplomatic. He called Szujak unworthy of representing the unity of the Hungarian nation, unfit to serve as a moral authority or role model, and he called on him to resign. By Wednesday, 4 days after winning the election, before he was even sworn in as prime minister, Magyar made a rare appearance on Hungarian state television, which was his first in 18 months. And let's think about what that means. So for 18 months, the state media that Hungarian taxpayers fund, that operate 5 television channels, radio stations, and the National News Agency, refused to platform the man who just won the election and damn near a landslide. They spent those 18 months running pro-government experts, promoting conspiracy theories, and acting as what Magyar himself called a propaganda factory. When he walked in, he clashed with anchors he accused of years of deliberate bias. He announced that one of his first acts as prime minister will be to suspend public media news broadcasts until he is satisfied that they can produce independent coverage. Afterward, he posted on the app formerly known as Twitter that he had just witnessed the last days of a propaganda machine. He also outlined 4 core priority areas for his government: anti-corruption measures, including joining the European Public Prosecutor's Office, restoring judicial independence, rebuilding media freedom, and restoring academic freedom. And on the EU funds, Hungary has almost 10 billion euros in suspended pandemic recovery funds that expire in August. To unlock them, he will need to roll back Orbán's rule of law violations fast enough to satisfy Brussels before the deadline. That's the clock that he's working against. Most new governments, our new government, starting in 2025, spent their first couple weeks picking gold office furniture. Now, what is he actually up against? To understand what Magyar is trying to do, you need to understand what he's trying to undo. And I covered the mechanics of how Orbán built this system in detail in the first video of this series. Go watch that if you have not, but let me give you the version that matters specifically for this conversation. Orbán did not build a dictatorship. He built something more subtle and in many ways more durable. He built a system that looks like a democracy, uses democratic language and democratic structures, but has been hollowed out from the inside so that the substance of democratic accountability has been systemically removed. And the reason that matters for what Magyar is trying to do is this. You can't just pass a law and fix it, because the people who would implement the law rule on its constitutionality, investigate violations, and broadcast its passage are all part of the machine that you're trying to dismantle. So let's walk through each problem specifically, starting with the media problem. Approximately 80% of Hungary's media came directly or indirectly under government control during Orbán's rule. The state media apparatus alone employs over 2,000 people, operates 5 thematic television stations, multiple radio stations, and the National News Agency. For 16 years, those outlets could not report news. They instead performed governance. They promoted government messaging, amplified conspiracy theories about the enemies of Hungary, and systemically denied coverage to anything that challenged the regime. Now, Magyar has the ability to suspend the broadcasts, install new leadership, and restructure the funding, but you cannot instantly rebuild a culture of independent journalism that was deliberately dismantled over 15 years. The journalists working there have spent their entire careers in a particular relationship with power, and those relationships do not change with a personnel announcement. Genuine media independence is not a switch that you flip. It requires rebuilding public trust, and that can take years, not just weeks. Let's hop into the judicial problem. Orbán packed the Constitutional Court, restructured the entire judicial appointment process. He created what scholars of democratic backsliding call legal but illegitimate courts, which are institutions that operate according to legal procedure, but whose personnel and culture are fundamentally aligned with political power rather than independent jurisprudence. Magyar has a 2/3 supermajority, which means that he can amend the Constitution, which is significant. But here's the problem. He cannot simply fire the judges. Legal systems have procedures, constitutional protections, their own timelines and mechanisms of resistance. And the courts that would rule on any challenge to those procedures are also packed. Magyar needs to rejoin the European Public Prosecutor's Office, which is the EU body responsible for investigating transnational financial crimes, which would bring external accountability that is harder to interfere with. But even that requires legislative action, implementation time, and cooperation from institutions that have spent 16 years doing the opposite of that. There is also a problem that gets talked about least, but perhaps matters the most, and that is that Orbán's system did not just capture institutions. It created a patronage network. It fused personal financial interests of an entire class of people with the network. The oligarchs who bought up independent media at government direction, the business figures whose contracts depended on government favor, and the officials whose entire professional identities are built on Fidesz loyalty. For those people, Magyar's victory is not a political inconvenience. It is an existential threat to the way they live. And people facing existential threat will fight back in ways that people facing ordinary political transitions will not. And here, I want to pause on a detail that I think illustrates the full absurdity of what he is navigating. The head of Hungary's state audit office, which is one of the key financial oversight institutions that needs reformed, is a man named Laszlo Windic. And hopefully I pronounced that right as well. Laszlo Windic is the current partner of Judith Varga, who you may recall is Peter Magyar's former wife. The justice minister whose resignation over the child abuse pardon scandal directly triggered Magyar's entry into politics. The woman who secretly recorded conversations about government corruption, Magyar released publicly, in which helped bring down the machine. Her new partner runs a government institution that Magyar now has to dismantle. There is also the prosecutor general problem. And then the prosecutor's office itself, remember how Orbán's system worked? The prosecutor general was a political loyalist whose primary function was making inconvenient investigations disappear. When Magyar released his recordings about government corruption in 2024, the prosecutor's office investigated his allegations and announced they found no evidence of a crime. We investigated ourselves and found no wrongdoing. Magyar called their press conference surreal and said that what they said was partly a lie. Now that prosecutor general is still there, not going anywhere voluntarily, and the courts that would rule on any legal challenge to his removal, you already know the answer, they're packed with Fidesz loyalists. Now here comes the central question, the heart of this video. Everything that Péter Magyar is doing right now puts a genuinely important question on the table. And I want to be honest with you, this is a question that I do not have an answer to because I do not think it exists. There are two schools of thought on Magyar's approach, and they lead to completely different conclusions. The first school of thought says that this is exactly how you do it. You have a mandate unlike almost anything in modern European democratic history. There is record turnout, you have a 2/3 supermajority, you have the alleged or supposed moral authority of having beaten a system specifically designed to beat you. You have the EU and NATO behind you, you have the support of a Hungarian public that showed up 80%, which is numbers they had not seen since the fall of communism. Now, you take that momentum and you use it immediately before the old regime has time to regroup, find its footing, and use the institutions that it still controls to obstruct your agenda. You name people who need to go publicly and loudly so that the political cost of staying becomes higher than the cost of leaving. You suspend the state media before it can be weaponized against you. You get European institutions involved so that the accountability is external and structurally harder to corrupt. I realize I'm tripping on my words a little bit today. It is really hot in this garage, so you guys have to forgive me a little bit. Speed is the strategy. Decisiveness is the mandate, and every day that you wait is a day that the political machine has to find new ways to resist. The second school says that this is how democracies overcorrect. And this is the harder argument to sit with. When you use a supermajority to demand the resignation of sitting judges, even judges who are politically appointed, when you call the sitting president unworthy and demand he resign, even though it is a president installed by an outgoing authoritarian, when you suspend state media broadcasts, even broadcasts that were 16 years of propaganda, you are establishing precedents. The next government with a supermajority will also pressure judges to resign, will also publicly declare the sitting president unfit, and will also suspend media that they don't like. Democratic institutions derive their legitimacy not just from who controls them, but the procedural norms that govern how they're treated. When you blow past these norms, even in service of restoring democracy, you risk establishing a new normal where norms themselves no longer hold. The cure starts to look like the disease. But I want to be clear, I'm not saying Magyar is wrong to do what he's doing. The system he inherited was not a legitimate democratic system that deserves procedural deference. You don't owe procedural fairness to a rigged process. But the question of where aggressive democratic restoration ends and democratic overreach begins is genuinely hard. And history suggests that we should take it seriously. There is a historical parallel that keeps coming to mind for me. Post-World War II, denazification faced almost exactly this same tension. How do you dismantle a system built by people who used legal and democratic structures to destroy legality and democracy? By using those legal and democratic structures. The Allied powers in Germany made aggressive, sometimes legally gray decisions about who could hold office, what institutions need to be rebuilt from scratch, and which judicial proceedings were legitimate. They did it because the alternative of treating Nazi-era institutions with procedural deference was clearly wrong. But the precedents that those decisions established have complicated downstream effects for decades. Hungary is running a version of that experiment right now in real time, and the answer to whether Magyar gets it right is not going to be clear for years. Let me pull back to the bigger picture, because Magyar clearly understands that what he is doing matters beyond Hungary. From CPAC to think tank for the Budapest playbook into Project 2025, Viktor Orbán's blueprint went global. And what Magyar is doing now is attempting to prove that the blueprint can be reversed, and that democratic backsliding is not a one-way door. That people inside the system, when given a genuine alternative and reason to believe, will show up. 80% of Hungarian voters showed up. But the lesson of Magyar's first week is more complicated than vote them out and fix it. The lesson is you need a supermajority. You need record turnout. You need institutional backing of powers like the European Union. You need 10 billion euros in frozen funds as a pressure lever. You need a whistleblower. You need years of relentless organizing from a standing start. You need all of that to just begin the work. And then the work itself, the actual dismantling of 16 years of institutional capture, is going to take years of grinding, contested, legally complicated effort that will be challenged at every step by people whose entire professional and financial lives depend on an old system surviving. And from anyone watching from countries facing similar pressures, that is both hopeful and sombering. Hopeful because it's possible. Sombering because of what possible actually requires. But I'm going to give you a time frame here. Here's what the next 6 months in Hungary is going to tell us. Can they move fast enough? The August deadline on EU funds is real, the institutional resistance is real, and the clock is continuously ticking. Can he dismantle the machine without becoming a new version of it? The supermajority that gives him power to restore democracy also gives him the power to abuse it. We are watching how he uses it. Will the old regime fight back? Fidesz still has 55 parliamentary seats. It still has its media allies in the private sector. It still has a patronage network, financial relationships, institutional loyalists. It lost the election, but it did not lose everything. Will the European Union actually deliver? The promise of frozen funds unlocked, of European oversight, of genuine external accountability, those promises need to be kept. If Brussels moves slowly, if bureaucracy grinds, if the August deadline passes without resolution, the whole accountability architecture Magyar is building starts to wobble. I've been covering Hungary on this channel because I believe it is one of the most important political laboratories in the world right now. Not because Hungary is large or a Central European power, but because what happens there, the blueprint being rejected and dismantled, tells us something essential about the health of democracy everywhere. Párta Magyar has the mandate, supermajority, moral authority, EU behind him. He has the support of a Hungarian people who showed up in record numbers. But now comes the hard part. And we'll be watching. Now, I started this channel, like I've said, because I believe that history has things to tell us about the present that most coverage will not take the time to explain. The videos into the Hungary story, I keep coming back to the same thing. These moments, whether it be the building of the blueprint, the attempt to reverse it, don't happen because of systems or structures or political science frameworks. They happen because of people. History is not abstract. It is people making choices in specific moments under specific conditions. Párta Magyar is making his choices right now in the presidential palace, on state television, in constitutional amendments, and prosecutor demands, and frozen EU fund negotiations. Whether those choices are the right ones, whether the cure avoids becoming the disease, and whether everything can actually be reversed, we are going to find out together. And we'll be right here in my garage when we do. Thank you so much for stopping by, and I will see you next time. Welcome in, friends.